Hello. Greetings to all my students who sought out this video. And if you just randomly found this on YouTube, my name is David Burrow. I am a teacher at Bishop Garrigan High School in Algona, Iowa. I've been teaching for a long time, and many times I've had people request tips they could use to help with the ACT. So first I want to go through a couple of just basic tips. Remember, you can and should use a calculator on the ACT. In fact, you can and should use a TI-84 or the equivalent. While mostly you'll just use basic calculator capabilities, there are a few things that are features built into a graphing calculator that will be useful. I would also suggest on the ACT that you familiarize yourself with the calculator ahead of time, and you might want to do things like make sure that it's set in radians. You also want to bring some scrap paper and probably a few pencils. It's good to draw pictures of problems that look complicated, and it helps you to solve algebra problems and just to keep track of where you are if there are things you want to look back at on the test. One thing in the directions it will always say is that figures are not necessarily drawn to scale. Well, years ago, I actually wrote questions for ACT one summer, and one of the things they told us is that you should always have any pictures that accompany things to scale. What that means is, while the directions don't say it, if you see things that look like they're the same, they are, and if one thing looks like it's bigger than something else, yeah, it really is. You have almost certainly heard the old adage of when in doubt, pick C. Well, that's not true. In fact, in the vast majority of situations, there is no most common answer. The answers are just randomly assigned. The exception to that is that you will find that E, or on every other question, K, are slightly more common than the other answers. That's especially true if you have a choice that says all of these or none of these. It doesn't mean that will be the answer, but it's just a little bit more likely than if you don't have that option. And one other thing that's important in the ACT is you should always have an answer for everything. Even if you're not positive of the answer, write something down and then on your scrap paper mark that problem as one to come back to and take more time on. Don't leave anything blank. So now we're going to go through the questions on a sample test. I've divided the videos into 4 parts. So there's 15 questions on each part. You can handle it how you want, but what I'd probably suggest is that you pause the video briefly after each question, take a look and think about it and think what you think the answer should be, and then watch why the answer is what it is. So here's our first question. And it says the blood types for 150 people were determined from a study as shown in the figure below. You can see the graph. And it says if one person from this study is randomly selected, what's the probability that they have either type A or type AB blood? And our possible choices are 62 1/50ths, 66 1/50ths, 68 1/50ths, 73 1/50ths, and 84 1/50ths. So this one really is an easy question. All you do for OR problems in probability is remember OR means plus. So I take 67, who had type A, plus 6, who had type AB, out of my total of 150 people. That's 73 out of 150, and that is D. So number 2. The monthly fees for the single room at 5 colleges are $370, $310, $380, $340, and $310 respectively. What is the mean for these monthly fees? There's lots of types of averages, but the key word here is mean. Mean is your basic average where you add everything up and divide by how many there are. I add up all those numbers, I divide by 5, I get $342, and that is choice H. So number 3, on a particular map, half an inch represents 18 miles. About how many miles apart are two towns that are 2.5 inches apart on the map? And it could be 18, 22.5, 36, 45, or 90. So there are a bunch of ways that you could do a problem like this. But when I see things like this, I often think about cross multiplying. And so I wrote a little proportion. I put 0.5 over 18, half an inch on the map over 18 miles total. And then I put equals 2.5, 2.5 inches on the map, over x, which is what we're trying to find. When you're cross multiplying, you multiply the two numbers that are diagonal from each other and then divide by the one that's diagonal from x. So when you do that here, you get 90. Now, you could have just as easily on this problem have realized that 2.5 is just 5 times a half. And so if you take 18 times 5, you end up getting 90 as well. Our next question is number 4. It says, given that f equals c d cubed, f equals 450, and d equals 10, what is c? And our possibilities are 0.45, 4.5, 15, 45, or 150. So we're going to plug in what we know and turn this into a little algebra problem. Here we have 450 equals c times 10 cubed. 10 cubes 1,000, so 450 must equal c times 1,000 or 1,000c. You divide, and remember when you're dividing and solving algebra, the number by the variable goes last, and so we do end up getting 0.45. Our next problem says if f of x equals 3x plus 7 quantity squared, then f of 1 equals what? And the choices are 10, 16, 58, 79, and 100. I went through this problem in class once, and I had people that made this way harder than it is. All you do is plug in the number that they give you here, which is 1. And so you take 3 times 1 plus 7, find what that is, and square it. Basically, it's an order of operations problem where they care that you know to do what's inside the parentheses first. When you do it, you get 10 squared, and that's 100. So next up, it says Jorge's current hourly wage for working at Denti Smiles is $12. Jorge was told at the beginning of next month his new hourly wage will be an increase of 6% of his currently hourly wage. What will be his new hourly wage? Now the choices they have here are $12.06, $12.60, $12.72, $18, and $19.20. And I will tell you, if he's getting a 6% raise and he only would make $12.06, that would be basically nothing, and that's why that's a stupid answer. So I know for a fact it's not going to be F. He might want to make something like 18 or 19.20, but those are also very likely going to be way too high for the wage that he'll make next month. Those are big increases. Key to this problem is to remember that 6% is 0.06. So what I've got on the calculator that's shown here is I took 12 bucks he's making now times 0.06. That gives you 72 cents. You add that on, you get $12.72. If I was actually doing this problem and not trying to explain it to you, I probably would have just taken 12 times 1.06. That would also give you 1272, and that is the right answer. So here it tells us the first term is 1 in the geometric sequence 1, 3, 9, -27, etc. And the question is, what's the 7th term of the geometric sequence? We have possibilities of -243, -30, 81, 189, and 729. So geometric sequences are a topic I personally will teach at the end of advanced algebra. And so a lot of times people that are taking the ACT haven't actually gotten to that topic yet. But it honestly doesn't matter, because what you're supposed to do here is, first of all, figure out that all they're doing to get those numbers, 1, -3, 9, -27, is they're just multiplying by -3 each time. You take 1 times -3, you get -3, times -3 again gives you 9. Keep on multiplying by -3. And so all I did here is I just kept on multiplying by -3. I figured out the first term's got to be 1, second is -3, third is 9, fourth is -27. And if you keep on going and multiply by -3, the fifth term's 81, the sixth term is -243, and the seventh term, which is the one we're trying to find, is 729, and that's choice E. And now we get to question 8. The shipping rate for customers of ShipQuick consists of a fee per box and a price per pound for each box. The table below gives the fee and the price per pound for customers shipping boxes of various weights. The question says Greg wants ShipQuick to ship one box that weighs 15 pounds. What is the shipping rate for this box? This actually does happen in shipping situations, and a lot of times you'll see like a chart like this if you want to actually ship something, and you've got to sort out what you actually will have to pay. So our choices this time are $9.75, $16.50, $19.75, $20, and $24.50. So the key here is he has one box and it weighs 15 pounds. 15 is between 10 and 25, so what I care about is the middle row of that table. That middle row tells me that we're going to pay a fee of $10 just to have the delivery guy take the package at all. And then we also have to pay 65 cents per pound. So I did $10 plus 15 pounds times 65 cents. You do that, you get $19.75, and $19.75 is choice H. Question 9. A computer chip, 0.32 centimeters thick, is made up of layers of silicon. If the top and bottom layers are each 0.03 centimeters thick and the inner layers are each 0.02 centimeters thick, how many inner layers are there? There might be 13, 15, 16, 52, or 64 possible layers. We got to figure that out. So to solve this, I started off by taking the total of 0.32 and I subtracted off the top and bottom. I subtracted off 0.03 and I subtracted off 0.03 again. And what that told me is that the middle part has got to be 0.26 centimeters. Each of those middle layers is 0.02 thick, so I divided by 0.02. And that told me we have to have 13 middle layers. So question number 10. The table below shows the number of cars Jing sold each month last year. What is the median of the data in the table? And we could possibly have 13, 16, 19, 20.5, and 23.5. So the big thing here is that median means the middle number, the same amount above and below. Since there's 12 months in a year, it's actually going to be the average of the two middle numbers that we'll get. Normally, if you find the median, you write everything out in order and you work from both ends until you get to the middle. Here, what I did is I looked at the months in the year. I crossed off the highest one, which is 29. I crossed off the lowest one, which is 13. And then I kept working from the ends. I crossed off the next highest and the next lowest, and I kept on going until I figured out that the two numbers in the middle are 22 and 25. We need to figure out what's exactly halfway between 22 and 25? Well, you could just look at those and think which of those numbers is in the middle, and it has to be k. Literally, what you would do is add them up and divide by 2, and indeed you do get 23 and a half. Next up, we're looking at number 11. Students studying motion observed a cart rolling at a constant rate along a straight line. The table below gives the distance d in feet. The cart was from a reference point at 1 second intervals from t equals 0 to t equals 5 seconds. You see a table and it says which of the following equations represents this relationship between d and t. Now I know a lot of people that get freaked out by the ACT because it's all story problems. But the key is to focus in on what matters. We're trying to figure out a relationship between the top row and the bottom row in this table. The possible answers they give us here are d equals t plus 14, d equals 6t plus 8, d equals 6t plus 14, d equals 14t plus 6, and d equals 34t. Something you should notice about all of these choices is their lines. They're all in like y equals mx plus b form, except instead of x and y, they've got t and d. And so the trick here is to look at the numbers and think in terms of a line, how are these related to each other? Well, the y-intercept always means what happens when the first number is 0. And when the first number is 0, the second number is 14. That's how I know that the y-intercept has to be 14. Slope is how much it changes as you go over 1. And each time I go over, this is increasing by 6. We go 14, 20, 26, 32. It keeps going up by 6. So the y-intercept's 14, the slope is 6. Remember, y-intercept's the number by itself in the equation, slope is the one by the variable. So here we got to have d equals 6t plus 14, choice C. Number 12. The length of a rectangle with an area of 54 square centimeters is 9 centimeters. What is the perimeter of the rectangle in centimeters? And it could be 6, 12, 15, 24, or 30. Now, ACT often does give you a list of formulas at the start and the directions. However, things like the area of a rectangle, you darn well better know its length times width. You should also know perimeter means you add up all the sides. And in a rectangle, that would mean you add up 2 lengths and 2 widths. And so what I did first is I used area equals length times width. And I figured out then that we've got an area of 54. We know that the length is 9. And if I take 54 divided by 9, that must mean that the width is 6. So the length is 9 and the width is 6. And I could just literally add up all four sides, 9 plus 9 plus 6 plus 6, or I could take 2 times 9 plus 2 times 6. Whatever you do, you're going to get an answer of 30. In the figure below, C is the intersection of AD and BE. And then it says, if it can be determined, what is the measure of angle BAC? It might be 80, 180, 110, 115, or cannot be determined. Now you might remember that I said before that E was actually a slightly more common answer, especially when you had situations like cannot be determined. And if I was clueless about this problem, that would be the choice I'd pick. However, this one does indeed have an answer. Now you might notice that I actually already wrote in 45 on the left side of the vertical angles in the picture. And that's because, while that technically was not given to us in the problem, I know that when you have an X, you got vertical angles, the angles across from each other are congruent, so that angle is also going to be 45. And really the key to this whole problem is there's 180 degrees in a triangle. So I take 180, I subtract the 35 that's on the left, I subtract the 45 that I know is a vertical angle, and what's left is 100. Now you do also need to realize that when it says angle BAC, the angle we're trying to find is angle A down at the bottom. The middle letter of the name is always where the vertex is. But it is 100, that's B. So next I figured out that he spends a total of 9 hours at school each day, 4 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1. And I took 4 nights times 360 degrees in a circle. That gave me 160, which is the answer. And so the answer is H. It actually turns out that the angles at the bottom are actually further off than core subjects is, because like electives looks to be the same size as lunch, and it should be 3 times as much. But what we have here is 4 nights times 360, that is 160. And now we got the last one we're going to look at in this first video. This month, Cami sold 70 figurines in 2 sizes. The large figurines sold for $12 each, and the small figurines sold for $8 each. The amount of money he received from the sales of the large figurines was equal to the amount of money he received from the sales of the small figurines. How many large figurines did Cami sell this month? So this is another one where you might get lost in the fact that it's a story problem, but our goal is just to figure out big equals small, find out what that's going to be. Choices are 20, 28, 35, 42, and 50. So this amounts to solving an equation. The money he got from the large ones equals the money he got from the small ones. And all I did is I took $12 times however many large ones he sold equals $8 times, and I figured out the number of small ones he sold must be 70 minus X, because there's a total of 70 and he sold X big ones. So 12X equals 8 times 70 minus X. I distribute out the parentheses, I get all my X's on one side, and I divide. Turns out the answer is 28, and 28 is choice B. That's the first 15 questions. We'll go through separate videos for the rest of these, but hopefully that's helpful to people, and good luck with the ACT.